Hello everyone, James here. Today we're going to be talking about Game of Thrones. Wait, not this one. Not that. We're talking about this. A Game of Thrones by George R. Martin. As promised, the content is back on schedule. A Game of Thrones, the first book in the Song of Ice and Fire series by George R. Martin. I've been relatively critical of George Martin in the past. I think it's become kind of a meme that the guy, has lost his way, has lost his steam, and he's not going to finish his big series. And I think I owe the guy an apology because I think it's having now read A Game of Thrones. I think I can sort of see why. Now, I'm hesitant to do this review. Not because I think I'm going to produce any controversial opinions, but more because, is it needed? Do we really need to go into reviewing A Game of Thrones these days? Like, I think it's now become like this big monolith of a thing. You know, it's a pop culture phenomenon. Probably the most recent pop culture phenomenon to exist. You know, we had the YA craze. And now we've got this sort of fantasy, big epic fantasy renaissance, the likes of which we haven't seen since like the Lord of the Rings films. So this book, going into it, obviously, I was incredibly familiar with the story. Like, I've spent many an hour watching the TV show Game of Thrones, being familiar with the story in its broad strokes, the characters and everything. So I didn't really know what I was going to think going in. Was I going to be prejudiced by having watched the show? And so I decided that I would watch the show along with reading the book. So I read chunks of the book and watched episodes of the show at the same time. And I can say without a doubt that George Martin really deserves all the credit he gets for creating this fantasy series. This book is obviously huge, as you can see, and a large part of that is just through to the thorough detail that George has put in to this work. The detail really is where it shines. You know, say what you want, like, the whole Game of Thrones thing has become this big, it's a meme in itself. Like, George, it's all about characters dying and these shocking twists, but that is not really what the book series Song of Ice and Fire is really all about. Having read interviews and seen interviews with George Martin, like, the real thing that he was trying to create with this book series is like this immersive world, this immersive story, and he has done that so well. I was worried that I'd get bogged down in all these details. Because in the past, with especially Lord of the Rings, like, there's so much attention to world building there. There's so much, detail that it bogged me down. I'm not that kind of reader. Like, I love good characters and a good story, and that is what I got with Game of Thrones. Like, I was kind of surprised, like, how compelling it really is. How all of those little details really make every moment shine, every character shine. The format of these books, obviously, again, this is something that's probably familiar to almost everyone. He splits the narrative chapter by chapter between all these different people, and it's such a good technique. Like, what he's done is he's really allowed the world building to come through with the different characters, and it's a very large cast of characters, and I've seen people be hesitant to get into this book series because they're like, how am I going to keep track of all these characters? There's so many, like, minor characters, little tiny ones, but there's like hundreds and hundreds of named characters. But I would encourage you not to be too concerned about it. And here's really why. So we start off in Winterfell with this really sort of core cast of characters. The Stark family. You got Ned, you got Robb, You got Catelyn, Jon Snow, Bran, Rickon, Sansa. Rickon, we don't care about Rickon. Like, he's 3 years old in this book. He's really not a big player. Sansa, Arya, like, these are the sort of central characters that we start with. And it's so well done that he introduces the novel starting with this core cast of characters. We spend quite a bit of time at Winterfell sort of getting to know the dynamics of this family and sort of what their motivations are and things like that. And then he does something brilliant, which is bring Robert Baratheon in, who's the king. He splits this whole family up. And what's great about that is that he sends them to all these different parts of the world. You know, Jon Snow goes north. Ned goes to King's Landing. He takes Sansa and Arya with him. Bran is left at Winterfell. Catelyn begins at Winterfell and then sort of goes off on her own thing. But what is so amazing is that, like, he gives us these characters that act as our sort of lens. And then he allows them to spread out and builds the world through their eyes. And it's just excellently done. It's such a good device because it allows us to see the unfamiliar through the eyes of the familiar. We get to know these characters, we sort of understand them. And then they're spread out to understand all the different roles and facets of society. Like, through Jon's eyes, we learn about the North and the Night's Watch. Through Ned's eyes, we sort of understand this complicated, dangerous political game. Through Sansa's eyes, we see sort of the other side of that coin, the veneer of these stories that she's been raised on of, like, princes and knights and all of that. That's sort of torn away through her eyes, like the end of innocence kind of thing. Through Arya's eyes, we see the struggles that women that are born into this society sort of face and how they can't really do all the same things that they would want to do as men are allowed to do. Through Bran's eyes, we don't see much from Bran's eyes about Bran. And that's a really interesting thing. Like, Robb Stark was one of the most interesting characters to me because George made the decision not to tell Robb's story through Robb's eyes. We get to see the beginning of Robb's arc through Bran's eyes. We get to see him stepping out of the shadows of, like, his father and stuff, and really growing as this lord in Winterfell left behind. He's this boy who is raised to a high level, maybe before his time. And we sort of see that through Bran's eyes, him struggling with balancing being, a very young kid. He's like 14 in the books, if you didn't know. We get to see him sort of growing away from his role as, like, a loving brother and being more of a lord. And then later on in the book, we get to see the same sort of thing through Catelyn's eyes, but it's different, it's skewed. Like, the voices of the individual characters and their perspectives are something that really is fascinating for this series. We get to see, like, I'm confident that if we saw the same events through different characters' eyes, each telling would be very different. And that is a fantastic piece of character work. And we even get, like, obviously we get Daenerys' chapters, which is, like, showing a completely different culture and stuff. All of this is just really fascinatingly well done. The plotting and foreshadowing of this novel in particular are just really tight. You can see, like, obviously, this is sort of where I get confused. It's like, am I just reading too much into these things because I'm familiar with how certain arcs are going to go from the show and stuff? And yeah, I can see there's definitely some things in here that I probably wouldn't have picked up on if I didn't think, that's something that's being brought in now to seed things that are going to happen much later on. But I don't think that takes anything away. In fact, I think it kind of enhances, because this is my first read of this book. So I think, personally, my first read, because of how similar the beginning of the show was to the books, I was able to like really easily comprehend everything that was going on, and it let me sort of read deeper than I probably would have done had it been my first time through. Um, and some advice would be, not to get too hung up on the details of everything. Experience them for what they are, because George has put all of these things in, like all of the talks of like these detailed feasts and everything, all of the banners and all of the different houses. A lot of that stuff is flavor, but it's like perfect flavoring, right? It's building this world so to the point where you as a reader might be like, like it's overwhelming the amount of stuff that there is, but through it all runs this really solid core that you can really grip onto. And I would encourage you, if you're intimidated by the amount of the stuff that's going on, just roll with it. Like if there are things that you don't quite understand, or houses, like characters that are coming in and you're like, who is this guy? I don't remember him. For the most part, you'll find that characters that are important will reappear over and over again, and then you will remember like, this guy is important, like he's been in more than one scene. And there are characters that are like not in more than one scene. Like there's characters that show up and they're like, this guy is from this house in the north, and you're like, okay, and then like he'll never appear again. And as a result of that, you're like, I don't really need to know about him. Like there's this whole, like all of the Northern Lords, like, for example, there's a lot of scenes where Northern Lords, like, there's a huge group of them talking about different things, and like you get details on all of the lords, but you can just sort of file that in your mind as these are the Northern Lords, and like you can treat them kind of as one entity. But it's just so good. It's just so good. Like I was really surprised. Like I thought that maybe there was like, because of all the hype, because of the big cultural thing that sprouted up around Game of Thrones, I was concerned that I would read this book and think this is overrated. But this first book in particular, I could not, with a straight face, tell you that this is overrated. This is a really, really excellent fantasy book, and it's achieved everything that I think it deserves to achieve in terms of success, and I'm really now looking forward to reading the rest of the books. I'm upset, maybe I'm upset even more now that they will potentially never be finished or whatever, but it's so richly detailed that I can understand now why, Martin must ache over this stuff. He must, it must torture him, like going through all this stuff and trying to keep it in track. And you can criticize the guy all you want, but I mean, really, like he's delivered something really spectacular, and he should be allowed the room to make sure that what he's delivering continues to be as good as it can be. Because, I mean, he could just dash out the end of the plot or whatever, but in the show, we've seen how that turns out, don't we? Once the attention to detail fades away, once that attention to a rich, cohesive, immersive experience goes away, what are you left with but another bargain basement fantasy show? This book has done, like, George has done the work. He has put in so much work to make this something more than just another fantasy read. Like, it's really special, and like it deserves to be the modern classic of the genre that it is. And I think, sorry, George, like, sorry for criticizing you and saying, just get on with it, whatever. Like, I'm sorry for being so blasé about something that really, like, I knew about but didn't truly understand until I'd read it, and that's it. I don't think there's much more to say, because what can you say? I could tell you about the plot. We know the story. Everyone who's watching this channel, I'm sure, has watched the show at least probably once or twice in their lives. I can't really add much more. You know, this book's 23 years old. What am I gonna say? Who am I? But yeah, if you haven't read the books, if you're familiar with this story through just the show, and you're intimidated by reading the books, I would say just go for it, because once you get in there and start, you know, reading the details and like experiencing this for yourself, it's an experience, and I think everyone who's a fantasy fan should go and read it. So that's my thoughts on A Game of Thrones. You know, it's a book. It's fantastic. It's a fantastic bloody book. So not much more to say review-wise. But I do have a little bit of admin. Unfortunately, it's not the best news. For personal reasons, the Witcher read-along live shows will be, unfortunately, no more. But take heart. You know, it's a shame. It's disappointing. But I understand why. I understand the reasoning why. Not too bummed out about it. You know, it happens. Life happens. Life gets in the way. But I've been really enjoying doing another Witcher reread. So it's not. We're not going to leave it. We're not going to leave it dead in the water. We carry on. We're going to push through. But we're going to do it in a different way. So instead of live shows with myself and Celise from the Book Armada, I think that I'm going to do some longer form stuff, Witcher related, each month, just myself. So I'm currently sitting halfway through, probably just over halfway through Blood of Elves. Hopefully you're all still reading, you're still enjoying it. I think what I'll do is I don't want to do just like a live show by myself, where it's just me like sitting here in this chair going on about The Witcher for ages. So I'm going to look into doing a live stream on the same day, at the same time. Why not? It's a pretty suitable time for me, to be honest. But I might just do it whilst live streaming footage of me playing The Witcher 3 Wild Hunt. If that sounds good to you guys. Maybe it doesn't. Maybe you think that I'm just I should just not do that and do something else. But I've got a few ideas. So would you prefer if I did just like long form analysis reviews? Like, it'd have to be in multiple parts. It would be quite long. Would you prefer that with me just in this format, just sitting talking? Or would you prefer that I do the same kind of analysis, just with some like more visually interesting stuff, like playing a game? Like it's relatively easy. I think it should be easy enough for me to live stream The Witcher 3 whilst talking about the Witcher books. So let me know what you think of that. And yeah, we'll talk some more. I've got a few more things to say about Game of Thrones that are suitable not for a review format kind of video, but for more analysis videos. So look out for those. They should be coming. I'm going to like film them now. I've still got a little bit of daylight, but let me know what you think. Have you read Game of Thrones? Did you enjoy it? Did you prefer it to the show? Let me know in the comments, etc., etc. Subscribe, like this video, whatever you want to do, and I will see you in the next video, whatever that may be. So bye for now, I guess, and take care of yourselves.